The big breaking story of the day, the centre has decided to borrow the compensation shortfall of 1.1 lakh crore rupees if all states choose this option and pass on the amount to them. The centre says that this will not impact the fiscal deficit, but it will be seen as capital receipts of state governments. Now, this is a significant climb down by the centre in order to get all the states on board on this controversial issue. Well, joining us for more on this to help try and get our viewers to understand this is the former Finance Minister of India, Mr. P Chidambaram. Mr. Chidambaram, thank you for your time. Now, opposition leaders are terming this decision as a change of stance from the central government. Economists are welcoming it as a cleaner way of raising the necessary funds swiftly. You are both. What is your reaction?
Well, I welcomed it yesterday. This is indeed a change of heart, but I don't think we should get into a verbal one-upmanship by calling it a climb down or a stand down. Let's take it as the centre has eventually recognized the validity of the demand of the opposition ruling states and has accepted the principle that this money of 1,10,000 crore should be borrowed by the centre and then on lend to the states as a back-to-back loan. I welcomed it yesterday and I welcome it again today on your show.
So, will this borrowing not have any impact on the fiscal deficit of the government, which is what the Finance Ministry claims?
Well, that's what the Finance Minister's letter of yesterday to the Chief Ministers of various states said, that this will not be counted against the FRBM requirements. So this will be shown as a capital receipt, but not to be counted against the FRBM requirements, which is a fair and reasonable response. So that takes care of that problem, that the fiscal discipline will be breached.
Okay, so let's look at the larger picture, Mr. Chidambaram. What does this episode then tell us about the functioning and the effectiveness of the GST Council then? Is it fair to say that at the end of, intense debate and deliberation, the fact that the government reached a decision widely regarded to be correct, you're also agreeing with it largely, does this mean that the GST Council is functioning effectively?
No, it means that in the GST Council, the opposition ruled states put up a very spirited case why the central government should borrow. The other side's case was also put forward. But eventually, if the government has accepted the point of view of the opposition ruled states, that's a welcome development. Instead of forcing the GST Council to go for a division or a voting, instead of forcing a decision upon the GST Council, this really means that the GST Council has prevailed. The GST Council's deliberations have had an effect on the government. And now I suppose the Finance Minister will go back to the GST Council, convene a GST Council meeting and formally ratify this decision as a resolution of the GST Council. Because the GST Council still has to do a couple of things. In an earlier meeting, they agreed in principle to extend the GST compensation cess collection period beyond 2022. Now they'll have to formally resolve that the extended period's collection will be used to service this 1,10,000 crore debt and will be used to repay the principal of the 1,10,000 crore. That's a formal decision that the GST Council will take, and I'm sure they will meet in the next couple of weeks or so and formally resolve to that effect.
All right. So, one of the reasons the centre is touting this as a win-win situation for all is that borrowing on behalf of the states will, in all likelihood, ensure that a single rate of borrowing is charged, right? And this would then be easy to administer. So, overall, a good move, good governance by this government. And will this move break the impasse then between the centre and the states over the issue of borrowings to recompensate the latter?
No, this is only a solution to half the problem. There is still the other half of the problem. According to the Finance Minister's letter, there is still a balance of 1,06,830 crore that has to be borrowed in the current year. And it is not yet clear, let me repeat my words, not yet clear who will borrow this 1,06,830 crore. Our cases, our argument is, what applies to the first amount, 1,10,208 crore, should also apply to 1,06,830 crore. And not all states want a share of this 1,06,830 crore. That is the second part. I think many states want it. And those states which want a share of this 1,06,830 crore, they must have the same terms as the terms offered by the Finance Minister yesterday. Namely, the centre will borrow it, on lend it to the states. It will not have an impact on the fiscal deficit. If the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister and the central government take that step, then I think the trust that was about to be broken, it was at breaking point, the trust that was at breaking point would have been restored, and we can expect that the GST Council will function smoothly and say near unanimously in the future. So I think the states expect another gesture from the central government.
Okay, so we've stepped back from a breaking point, but more needs to be done. Lastly, Mr. Chidambaram, stepping back again to look at the bigger picture, there's been a global rethinking of the conventional wisdom when it comes to fiscal discipline. Developed country governments, the World Bank, the IMF, all of them who took fiscal conservatism as the core pillar of sound economic policy for decades, they're now practicing a much looser fiscal policy themselves, and they're encouraging other countries to do so as well. In India, though, we have, the constraint that we don't have an international reserve country. Our starting fiscal position is not particularly healthy. In the circumstances, would you still like to see a significantly more expansionary fiscal policy, or do you think the government has been prudent in holding its firepower?
No, I think the government has been too cautious, unnecessarily cautious. In fact, what you said is not the current position of the international bodies and economists. The current position is that this is not the time to talk about fiscal conservatism. This is the time to spend. In fact, every country is spending. There are countries which spend as much as 20% of their GDP. The average is nearly 10%. Even for developing countries, the average spend is about 5 to 6% of GDP. India's spending so far, everybody is calculating this, is barely 1.2% of GDP. The original so-called 20 lakh crore package and the current package, which has been bandied about as 73,000 crore rupees to 1 lakh crore rupees. These numbers are highly exaggerated. The total value of the fiscal stimulus imparted so far by the central government is only 1.2% of GDP. This is the time to step up spending. This is the time to make cash transfers to the poor sections of the people. We have recommended that the bottom half of the family should get it. All right, don't do it for the bottom half, do it for the bottom 1/3. 33% families of India deserve a cash transfer. If you do that cash transfer, you will find that the economy begins to revive. Without that cash transfer, revival is far away.
All right, Mr. Chidambaram, thank you so much. This is not the time for prudency. This is the time to spend if the economy is to recover quickly. Thank you so much, Mr. Chidambaram, for your time today.